So today we're going to continue our subject. We've been looking through the contents of what is essentially a book which we wrote, which is now out on Kindle. The hard copies, we're just waiting for them. Kindle, you can find it there, The Way of Christ. The Way of Christ. And if you're a Kindle reader, you can get that. The iBook will be available in the next week or so, and I say the hard copy shortly. And it's a book where we're trying to put into simple terms what the lifestyle is we're trying to live as Christians. Have you ever been stuck behind somebody driving a car with a fish on the back? And they've been driving really slowly. And you've been getting frustrated because you're late for work, and so you're leaning on your horn. Two different versions of you've got a fish on the back of your car as well, and one of you wants to go fast, one of you wants to go slow. Another Christian will have one idea about living in this way, another one will say, no, we've got to live in that way, and there's about as many different viewpoints on this. And so we've gone back to the scripture, particularly the writings of Jesus, or the things that Jesus said, and the second half of the books of Paul, where Paul the Apostle talks about lifestyle. And we're saying, how do we live? How then shall we live as Christians? Having received the Spirit of God, having been born again, having been made followers of Christ, how then shall we live this life? What does that actually mean? And because we're a church that comes from many different cultures and backgrounds, that becomes even more complex. And yet it must be able to be done. And so we put together this little book which contains 30 principles as to how we live as Christians, 30 discipleship principles. And our principle today, we're continuing the theme of peace, and our principle is the principle of harmony amongst the saints. Harmony. Harmony is not a hairspray. Harmony is a principle of how we live as the body of Christ. If we can pop it up, I'd just like for us to read it out aloud, and then we'll spend some time diving into this. Let's read this from the very beginning. Ready? The principle of harmony amongst the saints. Admitting that at best I only see dimly and understand incompletely, I determine to live in unity with my brothers and sisters, maintaining at all times the unity of the Spirit. As a follower of the way of peace, I will quickly forgive perceived wrongs committed against me and not allow anger, resentment, or unkind words to abide in my heart or on my lips. They're great words, aren't they? But so hard to live. So much of what Jesus said, it's so great to put that sort of stuff on your wall, but to write it on the fleshy tables of your heart and try and work that out, and to be that, to follow Jesus, or to say you follow Jesus is fairly easy. To be Jesus, to be Christ to the world, or even to your family, is 10 times or 100 or 1,000 times harder. How to live in harmony, how to live in community, which is the same word in essence, is a vanishing art in our society. I've meditated long and hard on this subject, inquiring of the Lord, why is it that we find it so difficult in our day and our generation to live in harmony with each other, in community? And there are three things the Lord dropped into my heart regarding this, which I want to touch on briefly to give some context here. I think perhaps one of the obvious reasons why it's hard to live in close community with each other is because of simply urban density. We live so close together with each other. If you're trying to dance and you're not very good at dancing, you need a lot of space, right? You know, when you see a dad dancing, you know, and he's trying to go for the whole disco dance, and he thinks he's from Greece, and he's doing all the moves. And you know, if you're that poor son or daughter that's standing on the sidelines, you want to distance yourself from him, preferably far enough so nobody can possibly imagine that you are their son or daughter, right? Because they're likely not only to poke your eye out, but likely to embarrass you. Am I talking the truth there? Now, if they are, like my mum and dad can jive like the pros. I mean, I used to sit in awe watching them jive, and they would tear up the dance floor. That was slightly different. And they could do it on a crowded dance floor. They could jive and throw each other around, and they'd never touch anybody, never hit anybody or anything. Me on a dance floor, it's like, Kung Fu Panda. You want to keep well out the way. So when human beings get close together, we rub up against each other, and that becomes difficult. And because we're all currently live so close together, most of us, when Columbus went to America and he found the American indigenous people that lived there, he discovered that they lived in each person had approximately 1 mile of space. Now, that doesn't mean to say they lived in a space with a mile around them, because they did come together in communities, but those communities, the aggregate space around them allowed for about 1 mile per person. That sounds like heaven, doesn't it? It's not surprising that Christopher Columbus said, these people, they are so peaceful, they are constantly smiling, and they fulfill the great commandment that they should love one another, even as they love themselves. That was what Christopher Columbus said of the people who were then demonized and became known as the American Indians, and became othered to such a degree that the greatest ever ethnic cleansing that's ever happened in the history of humanity happened and is still happening in the country that points its finger at the rest of the world for it. Now, I'm not having a go at any Americans here, because the British have done exactly the same. In actual fact, most nations have done exactly the same. It's very easy to point the finger at other people when the finger really should be pointing back at us. But the issue of urban density is a problem. The second issue is the fact that we live in not only very close to each other, but in a very multicultural society. Now, I love our church. I love the fact there's lots of different cultures and stuff here. That's fantastic. But that creates its own challenges, does it not? I remember when Pastor Ebenezer first came to this country, and he came to see us, and I took him out to the harvester, and the lady came round, and he ordered his meal, and they eat with their fingers out there. And I had never been to India. I had no experience of that. And they brought the food, and Pastor Ebenezer just dove into it. I mean, just with fingers and stuff. And I sat there horrified. Dude, what are you doing? And he looked at me horrified that I'm trying to eat. Why are you trying to eat beans with a fork? The fork is totally not designed for eating beans. Your fingers are. You see the wonderful disjointed when cultures come together. And we live in a society and in a church, and the early church was exactly the same, where we have many cultures coming together. Now, that's okay in a church, because in a church we have an overriding culture. Is that right? So we have people from every nation, tribe, and tongue, but we come together around a single Savior. We come together around a single kingdom, and kingdom culture trumps white British culture. Kingdom culture trumps Nigerian culture. Kingdom culture trumps Indian culture. It trumps a lot of them, and around that we can all come together. But in the world that we live in, that's very, very difficult, because for instance, when I go to India, is one of the things culturally which is quite interesting is out there. Here, if guys are holding hands and walking along, holding hands with another guy in the street, it means a certain thing in our society. Pastor Ebenezer is in India. He will hold your hand and walk along. And that freaked me out. I didn't understand that culture. I was kind of like, dude, what are you doing? So we have these different rules of engagement, which makes that more difficult, more challenging, and more fun as well. The third thing is simply that we have this philosophy. The Western philosophy is an individualistic philosophy. It's one that doesn't give itself very, very well to a community. I have taken to saying hello to everybody I meet on the street where possible. And the looks you get are very strange. Have you ever tried this? You know, I love that part in, what's it called? The Crocodile Dundee, when he comes to New York and he's walking down Manhattan, he's going, "Good day, good day, good day, good day, good day," and everybody's looking at him as though he's a lunatic. Well, they do that with me. But I hate living in a world where you walk down the street and you look at somebody and the look is one, are they going to attack me? Are they going to hurt me? Are they dangerous? Are they this? Are they that? Are they... And you go past and you just sort of just keep that look. And I hate living in that sort of world. So the only other option is to say good morning or good afternoon. And then they really think you're a lunatic and you're about to attack them. And so we've lost the skill sets we need to live together, right? In a small village, I come from Thanet, which is actually quite a small, certainly when I was growing up, quite a small environment. We all kind of knew each other. As some of you have been speaking to me as we've been going through this stuff about some of you came from village culture where you know everybody, whether that's a village in the middle of a little village in Cornwall, or a village on the Isle of Wight, or a village in Nigeria, or wherever it is you come from, or India. The village culture breeds in you a certain amount of skill sets which enables you to live like that. Now, when we come together as a church, we are thrown in this mixing pot we call church, and most of us have to relearn those skill sets that enable us to live in harmony with one another. So much of what Jesus assumes, the skill sets he assumes and Paul assumes people will have, we don't have anymore, or we are lacking in many of those skill sets. Now, living in harmony with each other is a sign. Many times Jesus said things like this, that they might be one that the world might know. So he links these two things together, the world understanding God and understanding something about God with unity in the churches. Now, in a world where there is 33,000 church denominations, it's no wonder the world doesn't know. And this is why one of our fundamental principles as a church is the principle of harmony amongst the saints. And to have harmony amongst the saints, we have to address these three problems. We have to address the issues of living in a single culture together. And a single culture is bound together by shared values, by shared traditions, by shared rituals. I like going to the Isle of Wight. One of the reasons I like going there is there's still some of the old sort of English rituals and traditions and stuff, and that's kind of nice. It's like going back to your roots, and I know many of you like that when you go back to the place you grew up as well. So finding those shared rituals, those shared traditions, those shared ways of doing and being is vital for us as a church and vital for any church. And as we learn how to do it here, so the world looks at our church, which is one of the most mixed churches in the country, and looks at it and goes, there is hope for the inner city when they see the inner life of City Praise Centre and see people living in harmony with one another and loving at one another, even though we sometimes don't even understand each other all the time, but we come together around something which brings us together and unites us. It requires a relearning of forgotten skill sets. And much of what we're looking at through these principles is relearning skill sets. And the third thing it requires is an abandonment of individualistic philosophy. It requires us to stop seeing the world as all about me, I, and myself. It's my iPhone, my iPad, iTunes. It's all about I, it's all about me, it's all about the ego. And in actual fact, if you've studied psychology, most modern psychology, the fundamental thing it tries to do is to consolidate the ego. So that to make you so you are radically separated from everybody else, because that's what's considered a healthy ego. I want to present to you a thesis which says that that is one of the roots of much of our West problems in the West. It's not about I, it's about us. Now, having said all that, let's turn to Ephesians 4, chapter 3. You're bearing with me there? You're still with the plot here? Ephesians 4, let's go from verse 1. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy of the vocation with which you are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love. That's great, isn't it? Do you think we need that? With meekness and long suffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, even as you are called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through you all and in you all. Paul here is assuming an understanding, a worldview of his listeners, or at least that his listeners are able to adopt a worldview that he assumes they can do this, but for us is so difficult in the West. Because of our individualistic mindset, when Paul starts saying there is one faith, there is one hope, there is one baptism, there is one God and Father of all who is over all and through all and in you all, we immediately start analyzing it and saying, hang on, how can there be one? But there must be two, there must be three, there's more than one of me and there's more than, there's me and there's you, there's more than one human being in this room and I have one thought about it and you have a different thought. See, we see multiplicity where God sees unity. When God looks upon this world, he ultimately sees all there is in a single unity, whereas we see everything that is in its multiplicity, and therein lies the disconnect between us and God. The problem we have in understanding to come to the unity of the Spirit is largely due to our Western dualistic thinking. We posit everything as binary opposites. It's black or white, it's this or that. She's black, he's white, he's this, da. And even, so we design our computers to operate this way with binary opposites. These fighting philosophies which fight against each other constantly. But if we look deeply, what we discover in God, and if we allow him to reveal it to us, is that reality is actually a unity. That where we see diversity, God sees unity. That when God looks at the human race, he sees one person. That when God sees, we look and we see black and white and yellow and red and brown. God sees one man, Christ. One new man. Again and again he says it. One new man. That you are all found in Christ. This one person who capitulates all of creation into this one singularity again. This way of thinking has led to the rise of the ego. I've talked about this before in each of us. This the I am. It's the I am that fights God for the place of I am. You know, God is the one person, when Moses went to him and said, "Who are you, God?" He said, "I am." And we said, "Oh, that's good. I am as well." The word I am is just the Greek word ego. It's that Paul says has to die. I has to die. I am has to go. All the time we're fighting for the I am in me, I can't lay hold of ultimate reality. I've got to let it go. Jesus said, if you lose your life, you'll gain your life. It's to let go of the ego is to gain God. It's to let go of holding on to this little scrap that we call me, that I can now embrace the great bigness that is God. But all the time I'm obsessed by the little I, this little scrap, this construction of my mind. All the time I'm obsessed about that, I can't wrap my hands around God. And because I can't do that, I can't wrap my hands around anybody else. I can't come to harmony with anybody else. Let me put it this way. Where dual thinking sees Pat and it sees Tom, non-dual thinking sees one person. Let me give you an example. If you have a car, and we look at a car coming towards us, we see something with 4 wheels and a steering wheel and a roof and 4 doors, and it's driving towards us. We look at it and we go, oh, that's a car. We've got problems if you didn't know that one. That's a car. That's a car. Okay, now if I take the door off, is it still a car? Yes. If I take the exhaust pipe away, is it still a car? If I take the steering wheel off, is it still a car? What if I take all the seats out? What if I take the wheels off? Is it still a car? At what point does it stop becoming a car? If I take the engine out, is it still a car? Yeah, it's just a car without an engine. At what point does it stop becoming a car? You see, car is just a concept. It's this amalgam of different bits and pieces, which when they all come together, we go, oh, car, right? We look at it, we go, car. Oh, look, there's a car. But there's not a single thing in that car that makes it a car other than our concept of car, right? When you see a tree, you look at a tree and it looks very beautiful and so on. Now, if I take the leaves off the tree, is it still a tree? Yeah, if I break some branches off, is it still a tree? What about if I take the branches, all the branches away, is it still a tree? What if I cut it down and there's just a stump, is it still a tree? Maybe, maybe not. But can you see its being as a tree is simply related to how we label it. How we label it. Now, in the West, we're obsessed with labeling everything as individual. I'm an individual, you're an individual, she's an individual. I am a human, that is a tree. The tree is different from the ground, and so on and so forth. The further east you go, the less that thinking holds true. If you look closely at a tree, you'll realize that the tree is simply a concept. It's an idea. It's something which is growing out of ground. You might as well say the tree is ground. In actual fact, the tree is made out of all the same stuff that the earth is made out of, and the rocks are made out of, and the stars are made out of. It's all the same stuff, but we see it and we say tree. Let me give you another example. A wave. I was down the beach a couple of years ago, and I was watching the waves, and as they were coming into land, I was talking to the Lord, and I said, Lord, I want you to teach me something here. And this is what he taught me, is when you see, imagine the waves coming in towards the beach, and a little wave starts popping up. And it's a little wave. It's a little way out from land, and the wave's just rising, and it's rising. And, oh, look at me, I'm a wave. Woo-hoo, look, I'm a wave. Hey, woo. And the wave gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, all of this wave, all it was a ripple on the ocean before then. But all of a sudden, this wave starts saying, look at me, I'm a great big wave. Look, I have a foamy crest. I'm advancing towards the land. Aren't I magnificent? Listen to the noise I can make. I'm surely the greatest wave there's ever been. Books will be written about me. You can get my ministry tapes if you wish. This wave has taken on an ego identity. It's taken on its own identity. What it's forgotten is that wave is not an individual entity on its own, because if I took away the ocean, what would happen to the wave? It would just be a muddy puddle. What if that wave was to look at another wave that's running alongside it and say, oh, I don't like the look of that wave. Let's get rid of that wave. What's going to happen to this wave if I get rid of that wave? Well, I'm going to halve my height because I've got a gap of water now it's got to flow into. If the wave suddenly says, right, that's it, I'm not going to be connected with any of the other waves in the universe, I want to be entirely on my own, and it launches itself, as waves do along the coast, hits the seawall and crashes onto the walkway, and it's just there. All of a sudden, it's separated from the sea. It's no longer a wave, is it? You see, it can only be, its identity is absolutely connected with the rest of the waves. It cannot exist without the rest of the waves. It cannot exist without the rest of the body of water underneath it, supporting it. And this is the underlying principle, which if you get into your heart, you will not have a problem with this. When you understand that your ego, your I am, is really just that little wave. And it's coming towards the land and you're going, oh, look, I'm beautiful. But all you are is made up of the same stuff as me. Black, white, red, yellow, we're made of exactly the same stuff. When you look at the earth, our bodies are made of the earth. And the earth is made of our bodies. It's exactly the same stuff. Everything in the universe is made of exactly the same stuff. And you say, yes, but we have a spirit. That's what makes us different. Well, there's only one spirit in the universe, and that's God. So we share that as well. There is nothing you can point to that is uniquely you. When you understand that, you understand it's not me, it's we. I cannot exist without you. I cannot exist without you any more than the wave can exist without the ocean, or the wave can exist without the waves around it. That means I need you. It means when Paul says here, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, he's essentially saying, let's keep the whole ocean together. Let's not break it all up. Let's recognize that it gets its power from its unity. Does that make sense? Maybe not. Okay, let's go into Philippians chapter 2. If I was to do a opinion poll here and I said, who's left-wing in their politics and who, don't put your hand up, and who's right-wing, some of you will go, oh yes, I'm right-wing, I'm left-wing. And what would be really great is if we were right-wing, if we could get rid of all the left-wing. If you've got a stick and you break off the right side of the stick, what do you got left? Well, you have right and left side, so you've got to keep breaking off the right side, haven't you? And what do you got left eventually? Nothing. You see, you can't separate yourself. You start separating yourself from your brother, you're actually doing damage to you. East is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. But if I carry on going east, where do I end up? If I cut off the west, what happens to the east? If I take a piece of paper and get rid of the right side, what happens to the left side? It disappears as well, right? You see, this is the essential unity. that God sees when he sees the world. That's why when you look at the world and you say, I don't understand why God allows this, I don't understand why God doesn't destroy that person, I don't understand why this is happening to me and that's happening to me, you're just not seeing things from a big enough perspective. Philippians 2 says this: if there be any consolation in Christ, if any comfort in love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any bowels of mercies, fulfill my joy, that you may be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. And that's where the problem lies. Our statement starts admitting that at best I only see dimly and understand incompletely. The fact that we see dimly, the fact that we understand incompletely means that none of us can really know the other person. It means that when I think I know you, when I think I know what your motives are, when I think I know what your opinions are, I really don't. Yoda said very famously, I can't do the Yoda voice, I wish I could. He said, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Suffering leads to the dark side. Is that right? Now, George Lucas didn't come up with that. It was a statement which was been around for centuries before, except he just added the dark side bit. To understand how disharmony works, we have to go back to our own misunderstanding about who and what we are. We have to go back and deal with the I am, that little wave that thinks it's something. You see, the basis of fear, so all anger rises out of fear. And the basis of fear, it comes down to me and you. When I start separating me and you, when I start seeing the things that are being done are being done to me, I have a right to be offended because you have done this to me. When we see things in a non-dual way, I realize that we are doing this to all of us. We can't put anybody out of the equation. As soon as fear arises, we have this reflex, this defensive reflex. Next time you're angry, just take a little bit of time by yourself and go to the Lord and say, Lord, what is the root of my anger? What is the root fear that's driving this? And so anger rises up on you because the kids are not getting their stuff together. What's the root anger? What's the fear? The fear is that we're going to be late. It's going to make me look bad, perhaps. Whenever you find anger rising up, look back and say, Lord, what is the root fear? And you'll find this root fear driven by your sense of otherness from that person. Fear, I feel this is happening to me. Therefore, I'm going to get defensive because I don't want to be hurt. See, I. So I'm getting defensive. Now, you might get hurt, but as long as it's not me getting hurt. But if I break off the right side of the stick, I break off the left side ceases to exist. When I hurt you, I hurt me. This is why violence can't be solved by violence, because it just perpetuates the problem. And fear then develops anger, and anger is the preparedness for battle. It's a physiological reaction. I start feeling angry. Have you noticed what happens as soon as you start feeling angry? As soon as you start feeling angry, you lose perspective. I can't see clearly now, admitting that at best I only see dimly. I only understand incompletely. My anger toward you has stopped me seeing things properly. You can see this outworking itself right now in geopolitical issues. You can see how North Korea and Iran and America, this triangle of nations at the moment which are getting increasingly angry with each other. And if you step back a little bit and you look, you see they have stopped listening to each other. They're not interested in each other's arguments. They're not interested in understanding each other. It's now at the position of defending our position and rallying the troops ready for war. Churches, The same thing happens if you don't recognize. As soon as you find anger in your heart, as soon as you see it, and honesty as a Christian is to say, I recognize that. I recognize that anger, and I'm not going to dignify it and call it holy anger or righteous anger. I'm going to recognize the anger, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, Lord, show me what I fear. Show me what I fear. And somewhere along the line, you'll find that fear is related to your little I am versus this other person's little I am. So we prepare for battle. The pool of our thinking, if you like, gets stirred up with anger, and that which should be tranquil so you can see clearly. We can't see clearly now. The mirror is steamed up with the wrath of our anger, and we start seeing men as demons. And at that point, we start trying to justify our anger, and we make this duality even more. This person isn't even fit to be called a Christian. I think they've got demons. I think that's why they're like that to me, because they're devil-possessed. Huh? Or that person, that nation, they're not fit to be called a nation. The black man is not really human. That's what justified slavery. That was the underlying, is that right? It's true, isn't it? That was the underlying argument, that they're subhuman. And the anger came, and it was only that which could generate such incredible anger in a white man's heart that would cause him to have that sort of attitude towards the black man. Yet we have that exact same attitude in our heart towards the natural world right now, often towards our brothers and sisters. This is why Jesus Christ said, if you are angry with your brother, you've already committed murder. You see, you're going down the same line. So catch it. You catch anger to live in harmony with each other. As a follower of the way of peace, I recognize anger. I name it for what it is, and I go back and I say, Lord, teach me. Teach me about this before it turns to hate. And I start selling my propaganda to all my friends and my Facebook friends. Do you realize what this person has done to me? This extreme polarity. It's you over there and it's me over here. I am absolutely right. You are absolutely wrong. And never the twain shall meet. And all of my friends have got to be on my side or your side. And we're now getting ready for war. You see, now we all do it. We all operate exactly the same way. Our politicians operate exactly the same way. So don't point the finger at them either. Just when you see it happening, understand it, and understand they're an extension of you. Remember non-duality? They are an extension of you. They've been brought up in the same society that you've been brought up in, that you have created and I have created, subject to the same teaching methods, subject to the same philosophical outlook. As we move down the road of hate, we start moving down the road of disassociation. I now become a little island, and I defend myself against all oncomers. I am a rock. What is it? Simon Garfunkel said, I am an island. I've got my poetry and my books to protect me. Nobody comes near me. Once we move to this level, hatred becomes psychosis, and we end up in essentially la-la land. It takes a work of God to capture us back. It takes a miracle, or it takes the decimation of a whole nation, or a whole people group, or a world war in order to reset the balance before another generation which didn't have the same prejudices and the same anger in their hearts comes through and starts recognizing, actually, I'm you, we're the same. We're the same. We talk different, we think different, we see things different, but there is one faith, there is one hope, there is one baptism. When God looks down upon the earth, he sees one people. One people. He sees one church. When Jesus prayed that they might be one. He was only praying that we might see ourselves the same way the Father sees us. And when you see yourself like that, when you see yourself that you, this little wave, this little I am, can only possibly exist because of all the other waves around it and the great ocean that's underneath it, holding it up. And even, here's a shocker, even that little wave itself is not the same bit of water for out to land. By the time it gets into land, that piece of water has changed entirely. It's not even the same water in that piece of wave. How are we doing? Let's close with, let's go to 1 Corinthians. No, let's go to Colossians 3:13. Colossians 3:10. You have put on the new man, or the new woman, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him who created him. In other words, you're made just like God. And in God, you're renewed in the image of him who created you. Point of Christianity, the point of sanctification is that you are made like God. And in him there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and is in you all. There it is again. Forbearing, he said here, put on, verse 12, put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies. See, because you view yourself differently. Verse 10 and 11 are talking about a change in our worldview. Because we see ourselves differently, now put on holy and beloved bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, long-suffering, forbearing one another, there it is again, and forgiving one another. If any man has a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so you do also. See, when you have this sort of mind change, then forbearing and forgiving becomes that much easier because there's not much distance between you and me anyway. If you have a malfunctioning body part, let's say your hand's malfunctioning, I hope you're kind to it. You know, Jo at the moment, she's dropping plates like there's no tomorrow. It's part of the effect of the chemo. And so it's every now and then I'll hear crash and there goes another bit of crockery. But she doesn't then take her hand and beat it with a hammer. You naughty, naughty hand, how dare you do it? If you've got a hand that's malfunctioning, you take it and you look at it and you try and examine it and you say, why is this hand malfunctioning? Is there a blockage in the communication between my head and my hand? What's going on here? In actual fact, if this hand gets angry with this, if I'm trying to hammer in a nail and I've got my hammer and I miss hammering in the nail and hit my thumb doesn't turn around and start hitting the hand that hammered it, does it? Paul says we're one body, one unity. And when we understand this, even if the hand that is trying to hit the nail misses and hits the thumb, it will reach out and say, I'm so sorry, thumb, let me hug you better. And the thumb won't go, no, I'm not going to let you do that. It allows it. See, we are kind to our own body parts, which is malfunctioning, and yet we are one body. So when we see one another malfunctioning, and I malfunction all the time, because I'm human, we bear with each other. We hold each other. We forgive each other. We forbear with each other. We quickly forgive perceived wrongs because we recognize it's not you and me. It's one body. It's this unity. And I am no longer then a fragmented, individualistic, alienated little ego identity, desperately trying to be a wave by myself as a muddy pool. But as I grow as a Christian, I start realizing I am an integrated, interdependent, communal being with a Christ identity that I share with you. And then I can say with Paul, it's no longer I. It's no longer ego that lives, but Christ. It's Christ. And I share that with you 100%. And the more you are free of your ego identity and the more I am free of my ego identity, the more we find Christ is one and is all. And we've got nothing else to argue about. That's why in the early church it says they sold. It's a big multicultural church that was. And it says they sold if they had stuff and they gave to anybody who had need. Now, when you know what your neighbour really is, it's ever so hard to be mean to him. When you know what he's going through, it's really hard to talk ugly about him. You stand up for your kids, don't you? You know, if a teacher has a go at them, you want to go up and say, how dare you talk to my kid? Don't you know what my kid's going through? Don't you know? Because you understand your kids. We truly understand each other, so we have the same care for each other. We understand that I can't live without you, Pat. I can't do it. If you take Pat away, I'm less, because Pat is one of the waves that holds me up. Now, Pat's never irritated me, but let's say Pat irritated me. That's okay. I still can't do without her. You're lovely, Pat. When we understand that we are one, then you can't lay a finger against another person. And you see, it's one of the people I love dearly is old Tessa. You love Tessa? Many of you don't know Tessa. She was worked here for many years. She's now in Wales. And you can never find Tessa saying a bad word against anyone. It was ever so infuriating when you were angry about something and you're trying to rally a war party, as you do when you're a young person. And Tessa would always say, yeah, but you just don't understand them. You just don't understand them. Why don't you take some time before God and ask God to reveal to you what they're going through, or sit down and ask them and find out what their world is. Walk in their shoes a little bit. You see, when you look at what's happening in the world today, so we can go right from the church right up to the big things, and you can look at the war that's brewing between North Korea and America right now. If you look deeply at North Korea, you'll find a little man who is very afraid that America's going to do to him what they did to Saddam Hussein and what they did to Gaddafi and anybody else who they disagreed with. And out of that fear is coming anger. And out of that anger is coming hatred. And that hatred spills out. It has to. It's an acid. It's a poison. And the whole nation is being indoctrinated, is being rallied together to prepare them for a war. And that will eventually bring them to a place of intense suffering. But when you look at America, you find exactly the same process going on there. And in the Brexit, for or against, I don't care whether you were for or against, you'll find the same process happening there. It's an indispensable part of the way the Western mind views things. You and me, only one of us is going to survive. No, my friends, if there's a future for our planet, all of us have to survive. That means all of us have to start listening to each other. We have to start understanding each other. We have to start understanding that from God's viewpoint, black, white, and male and female, Korean, Iranian, we're one. We come from one forefather.